This week on the Derek's Live, we're talking about building a marriage that's worth your legacy. This week's topic is flirting with the dirty D. Don't do it. That's how you get an infection. Let's fucking go. What's going on, guys? Your host, Shawn, this week on this episode of The Derek's Live, a podcast for badass parents. I'm here with my beautiful wife and co-host, Emily. How's it going, baby?
I'm good.
Get that infection.
That was good.
If you could have seen her face when I said that, it was priceless. Absolutely priceless. I hope it made you smile as much as it made her smile. But it's a real issue. You can't be flirting with it. So we started a really cool episode last week that we're excited about this series. We've been married mostly happily for 15 years. And it's just a smirk mostly.
It's like 14.9 of that has been really happy.
There's been a few days here and there.
It's sprinkled.
Sprinkles of unhappiness, but we figured that out, right? So
that's what it's about.
So we're going through this series over the next couple weeks, and we're just kind of sharing each week some of the things that have really helped us endure and be really happy in our marriage with each other. I think it's a rarity anymore that you see marriages last a long time. I think it should be more common. The average length of a marriage is, what do we look at? 8.2 years?
Yeah, 8.2 years.
So we're almost double that, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, that was a cool realization, looking at the data.
So we want to walk through some of these things with you guys. And so this week we're talking about the dirty D. What's the dirty D, Emily? Tell them about the dirty D. Tell them.
The infection isn't what you think it is. The dirty D is divorce.
Yeah.
And it's even just the word divorce. It's kind of become so commonplace that it's almost a joke.
Mm-hmm. Well, we desensitize it almost. I mean, there's all these TikTok reels or Facebook reels and people just talking about, oh, I'm going to leave my spouse because of this and this and this. And they complain about
like asinine stuff, like not real. Like, oh, he left the toilet seat up again. And he left the toothpaste with the lid off.
Mm-hmm.
And, he made the bed, but he didn't put the pillows in the right order. Like,
it's just
really?
like this casual thing that we just
Right.
throw around.
It's a joke.
And I think a lot of people get married now with the option, right?
Mm-hmm.
We sign prenups to protect ourselves, and we've got these barriers that we put in place to make sure that we've got exit options. Yeah. And so people go into these marriages with an out almost starting out. And I think one of the things that really has set our marriage apart and really has helped us is that we had a discussion early on in our engagement that, listen, if this is what we're actually going to do, it's forever.
Yeah. Well, and it wasn't one discussion. It was an ongoing discussion from the moment we got engaged until we got married. And then because we've had the discussion so many times, it's never been even part of our vocabulary in our marriage.
Yeah. And so it was this conscious choice that we really we made because we knew that we didn't want to have to deal with those things. And I think our faith was a big part of it.
Yeah.
We were both in church when we met. And so we both had these, religious viewpoints that were faith-based. We're both Christians. And, part of our faith is there's a biblical foundation of marriage and what marriage is supposed to look like and that it's supposed to be forever.
Yeah. So one of our scriptures that we kind of hold on to comes from Mark 10, and it says, At the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh, so they are no longer two, but one. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate.
And so look, like, I don't know where you fall on like the religious ideology. Not everybody's faith-based, and that's okay. I'm not saying that you have to be, but for us, it was something that was a big part of it. And no matter how you feel about it, the numbers, when you look at like the statistical data, what's the stat, Emily, that...
So it says having strong religious beliefs actually decreases the likelihood of divorce by 14%.
So, I mean, that's pretty crazy that there's a 40% chance that...
14.
No, well, overall marriage divorce
Correct.
rate, right?
Right.
The overall marriage divorce rate's 40%.
For first marriages.
For first marriages. And that it dropped, like it increases by like 20% by each consecutive marriage almost.
So if you get married more than twice, you're like really likely to get divorced.
Really likely to get divorced. So we actually found there's this really cool data point that this website pulled all these different statistics in from different surveys and resources, and we'll drop a link for that in the podcast episode description. So whatever platform you're listening to this on, there'll be a link to that. And there's really a lot of really cool data that's out there on it, and looking through it and kind of knowing where the weaknesses and stuff are, it kind of helps you. I know as I was reading it, I was like, man, maybe that's an area that you got to pay attention to as you're reading through some of the stats. It's really crazy what knowing where couples like general populace weaknesses can help you strengthen your own marriage. Mm-hmm. So check that out. It's pretty cool. So, but that being said, like whatever you believe, like you've got to look at the numbers and realize that there's some correlation between foundational religious beliefs help strengthen your marriage. And so whatever that is for you, I think that across religion, we see this pretty common theme that marriage is supposed to be a long-lasting commitment, that the only real out is adultery. And even then it kind of leaves it open, like it's not a requirement. It's an in discussion that like, hey, if it's not working out and there's adultery in the marriage, you've got to form some opinions on that of what's right for you. And I'm not going to get into the outs of it in that, but, and also like there's a subsect of people that would say, well, if you're in an abusive marriage or something like that, there's not really a biblical foundation for that. But what we would say is that you should remove yourself from an unsafe situation. And so I would never counsel someone who's in a physically abusive situation to stay in an abusive situation. Now that doesn't mean that you have to get divorced, but you should remove yourself from harm's way until it's safe to put yourself back in that situation. And
we would also encourage you to seek counseling and assistance for you and your family if you have children, especially.
Yeah, and from somebody that's licensed. Look, I know you guys like to talk to your pastor, and your pastor's a great resource to give you counsel, but if you're in that situation, you need to sit down and talk to a licensed therapist. So take that for what you want. But our faith has been a really big part of that. But I think also, Emily, I think we both came from broken households.
Yeah.
And so your parents were divorced twice.
To each other.
And my dad, he was in prison when I was a month old. And so I grew up in a house with, a single mother, with 2 long-term boyfriends throughout my childhood and a few short-term boyfriends. So like there was not a foundation there for that for me. And
not a lot of stability in either one of our like childhood.
So, I mean, was there like, even in school, what was it like for you being when your parents were separated? Was that all homeschool, or were you in public school during any of that time frame?
No, I was actually in public school for all of it.
Okay.
Which was probably why I was in public school, because
mom had to go work.
Yeah, mom had to go work. So that was the reason we stopped homeschooling and started going to public school. And I think that was traumatic in and of itself. And I don't know that I made the correlation. It was complicated. And fortunately, my dad lived close by. So like I didn't have to travel. Like we never stayed at his house and had to go to school the next day. Like we only saw him on the weekends basically, or for a few hours on a weeknight. So we never stayed at his house and had to get up and like super early to travel to school. We were always at our...
Well, I know, but like, I guess what I'm asking is with like your friends, was it weird for you when friends were like talking about their parents, or you went over to a
Yeah.
friend's house and their parents.
Because this was still like early 90s. Divorce happened, but it wasn't something you talked about.
Yeah.
And especially in the church, we were really involved in the church, and it was like a huge, like, we don't talk about.
I mean, there's like some churches that if you get divorced, they make you stop coming to church.
Yeah, we were right there.
So
Yeah, we were asked, like, my mother was actually involved in certain ministry aspects, and she was asked to step down.
yeah, like they won't
And
let you lead.
And that was really hard because it was a lot of her identity and a lot of our identity.
Yeah. Well, and it's almost like you're in your worst moment. You need
kick you when you're down.
You need someone that's going to draw into you and love you and
that was
be there.
It's kind of the opposite.
And it's like the moment that you think you're going to get that. And that's not all churches. I'm not saying that, but there are some churches that have fantastic divorce ministries that are really, really doing amazing work. But there are also some that don't even talk about it and just ostracize you.
Yeah.
So
unfortunately ours was the latter. And it kind of put a bad taste in our mouth early on for church. But even at school, like I don't remember there being other kids with divorced parents. And so like the first year I was in public school was the separation, and the following year they were divorced.
okay.
And so both years were really awkward because like I didn't want to go over friends' houses. All of my friends from like homeschooling and from church, they were all in like committed relationships, and they were doing like family things, and we couldn't be a part of that. So it was hard and awkward. And then you throw in the financial burden of being a separated family.
Yeah.
And that made it even harder because we didn't have the resources to go and do the things that we had done up until that point.
Yeah. Well, I know, like for me, I never had like a real stable father figure. And so that was a big part for me. Like I didn't want my kids to have that. I wanted them to be able to be in a foundational home where their parents poured into them. And it wasn't this like back and forth tit for tat. Cause my friends that for me, my dad was in prison. So my mom and dad didn't really fight and have those normal disagreements that divorced parents have.
Yeah.
There was no tension there. It's just a different
Yeah.
dynamic. But my friends who were divorced that I got to kind of see what would go on was not pretty.
Yeah. It could get really ugly.
And it's a lot of parents who are waging war with their kids, unfortunately. And so I always want to make sure that whoever I married was never going to allow our children to be in that situation.
Yeah.
And so that was a big part of it for us.
Well, and that was, I love my parents and I love our family, but early on, I think that it was very much like, I think the kids in certain aspects were used as a weapon. And that was really hard because it felt like we couldn't get comfortable anywhere because we didn't really know what was coming. It's personal.
Yeah.
And you don't want to like break that, but adultery was the reason my parents got divorced. And so it was personal to my mother.
Yeah.
And it was hurtful, right? It really hurt her. And we were young. I mean, I was the oldest of 4 and I was only in 4th grade, but I felt guilty anytime I was with my dad and had fun because I knew how much my mom was hurting. And I felt like if I was with my dad enjoying myself, that I was hurting her too.
Yeah.
And whether or not that was because she made it that way or because that was just my emotions, that was the situation that I lived in. And so I felt like I could never be comfortable staying with my dad or being with my dad because I always felt guilty that it was my
I feel
mom.
like you almost had to pick a side, right?
I know we did.
Yeah.
I mean, definitely. And that made it really hard when they got remarried because we spent almost 2.5 years picking sides and then they remarried each other. And it was really hard to comprehend that as a 4th, 5th, 6th grader. How do you come to terms with this? Like, we're not supposed to like him. We're not supposed to have fun with him. And now we're remarried and we're moving across the state. Like, it was really hard to comprehend. And so when we got together, those were conversations that we had at 19 and 20 years old. Like, this is where I came from. I don't want this. I don't ever want our children to have to pick a side. I don't ever want our children to be in a situation where they feel guilty for being with one of us ever. And from that divorce conversation, that conversation stemmed and it allowed us to kind of be intimate about our childhood with each other. Like, this is why I feel this way. And we had those conversations really, really early on. And we've continued to have those conversations as we've grown and matured and talked through, like, this is why I feel this way. And I didn't realize that this was connected to that.
Yeah.
So it's been interesting to kind of connect the dots, I guess, that I have some of these insecurities because this is how we grew up.
I think it's really interesting to see as we age and we mature how sometimes you start to see things from a different perspective because you have a different viewpoint, right? And so you get older and you kind of look back on things your parents did and they start to make a little more sense. Yeah. But some of those things you also make less sense and you kind of get upset about them even more. So it's a really a catch-22. But to dive back in, we were purposeful from day one about this. It was a decision that we made, right? And so I think the first thing that we agreed upon when we got married is that we were never, ever going to verbalize or entertain the idea that it was an option. So, and it was interesting because we even stated, like, it's not a joke. Like, we're not even going to joke about getting divorced. Well, that's easy to do, right? I think you get playful with each other, and it's just like, oh, I'm leaving, or here, sign this paperwork. Like it just becomes. And what we don't realize, it really is desensitizing us to a real issue. So we hear so many people talk like, oh, just sign this paperwork and I'll leave tomorrow. Yeah. Oh, if you don't like it, you can leave. Or it's just those little undercutting jokes that we make at each other. And all you're doing is just planting this seed, and then you continue to water it. Yep. And it's just this option that you make. And before you know it, it's like you look around and you're like, shit, what am I doing here? I need to get out of this. Yeah. And it's an option. And so, like, listen, there are moments in your marriage that you're going to question your marriage. I mean, I don't think we've ever questioned our entire marriage together, but I think that there are times that we've come together and kind of reframed, and we're like, hey, what we're doing is not working. Yeah. We need to pivot. Yeah. Right. But I do know people that I've been friends with long term who have had marriages or are married together that have like come to me and like, man, I don't know. Like, I think I've fucked up. I don't know if I made the right decision here. Yeah. And so there's those conversations that take place for some people. But when you come in from the forefront with a determining factor that, listen, this is it, we're not entertaining this, it changes the perspective in the conversation. Yeah. It really does. And you can't flirt with the idea. You can't entertain it. You can't let it fester, because all you do is give it permission when you do that. Yeah. So the other thing we do, Emily, is we're really careful with our friends about how much access we give them to our marriage and how we discuss our marriage. And who we hang out with. Yeah. I mean, all of those variables. So we are very conscious about what we say to our friends about each other. So and our family, as anybody, if we're having an issue, we don't take it outside of our relationship until we've solved whatever the issue is. We don't call somebody and complain. We don't call somebody and bitch. We don't call the mother-in-law or the mother, and because what that does, again, it's planting the seed. Well, just come home. Just come stay the weekend. Just take a break. Because again, those are just tiny little seeds that you're planting. Oh, it's okay to not be together and work it out. You can just leave and fix it later, or not fix it at all. And again, you're planting those little seeds. And it's kind of interesting because I don't think early on we really had a choice. We didn't have a lot of quality relationships to rely on. So when we were, when we struggled, we didn't have a choice except to work it out. Well, I think one of the things that we did pretty early, that as we had a pretty quick dating, like we didn't date long. No. We got engaged 4 weeks in, right? But we were engaged for a little over a year before we actually got married, and we lived together during that time. But during that time, we really became friends. Yeah. And I think we strived to be friends first, and in love because of our friendship.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's really helped us, is that we find common ground in everything, and we're willing to make those sacrifices to make it work for each other.
Yeah.
Because it is a sacrifice sometimes. Like, we do each other for things that we don't necessarily enjoy doing, but we do it because I know that you love doing that, or you know that I love doing that. And it's a two-way street, and it's really like stepping and being willing to put yourself aside to make it work.
Well, and learning to be flexible,
Mm-hmm.
that it's not always a win-lose situation. Sometimes we can both bend and be happy in the middle.
Because look, like there are things like that I don't get a lot of love out of, but watching you love it fills me, right?
Yeah.
And so even when I go and do something that I'm not crazy about doing, seeing how much Emily loves doing that thing, it just adds to me. And that's, for me, it's not about making the sacrifice to do something just because you want to do it. It's all, man, I can't wait to see how she feels about this. I can't wait to see her do this, because I know how much you're going to love doing it.
Like exercising this morning at 6:30 a.m.
Just doing Pilates in the front yard. And listen, full disclosure, I thought Pilates was just like kind of like a little variant of yoga, and I guess it is, but there's some tutus and shit involved in that. It's a little bit of ballet. So I'm in the front yard doing plies at 7 a.m. with this woman. I'm like, I love you, and I'm going to do this, but we might do something different tomorrow, because I did not know what Pilates was.
And I didn't tell him.
Nope.
But there was something very sweet and intimate about you pushing through, because I know that you know how much I enjoy that type of movement and that type of exercise. And I know that that's not your forte, and we won't do it all the time, but to hear you laugh and enjoy exercising with me at the butt crack of dawn to something that I would pick was really special and really intimate. And it made me smile. And I'm sure that you probably smiled at me because I was struggling. But it was just a cool moment that we both met in the middle, like, hey, we're going to do something a little bit different. It's not something that we've ever tried before.
Yeah. And
I kind of knew what Pilates was more so than you did.
Yeah, I know. I'm very aware of that. I got set up.
But it was still very intimate, and it was a neat relationship building experience, because it pushed us both in a way that we're not used to being pushed.
For sure.
So, and it's really special when we exercise together. I know that that's silly, but I don't know. I find that really, it fills my cup. So anyways.
We're doing a lot of exercising lately.
Yeah.
So it's been good. So we're not where we want to be, but we're getting where we're going.
We're moving in that direction.
Yes. But like I say all that, I don't remember what we were talking about now. I can just picture me in the front yard doing plies. I can feel it in my ankles still too.
No, but we were talking about the action steps and about who we spend our time with, and being conscious of what we say. We don't talk crap behind each other's back. Like, I am not going to call any of my friends and bitch about you. That's just, and it's awkward because a lot of my friends call and don't have that same perspective. But it's, and I'm not,
well, but I think we both get friends who talk to us because they want counsel.
Correct.
And it's not, sometimes you can get counsel without bitching.
Yeah.
But I think it's okay to have someone in your life that you get counsel from.
Right.
Right. That's not the same thing. And I think it's important to distinguish that.
Yes.
Because there are people in our life that have more experience than us, and things that I reach out to and talk to about things. Probably not about our marriage a lot, but other things. Right.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's wisdom in counsel. So if you've got somebody that you're looking for advice from, and you're talking about your marriage and you don't know how to tackle a problem you're having, do that.
Right.
Seek wisdom.
Seek wisdom.
But don't belittle your spouse in the process.
Correct. We don't have to tear somebody down to fix a problem.
Yeah.
So, and it's not, I'm not one to share your faults, and I know that you don't share mine, and we've got our faults. Please don't ever.
You're
not
horrible. No, I mean, I'm horrible. I meant, no, I love you. You're not horrible.
We don't, but I mean, we have our faults and we know that, but we're very quick to talk to them about with each other and not so much with a third party. I think we've been diligent about seeking wisdom in areas that we're weak. And when we have an issue that we can't resolve.
Well, and I think that like you just said, though, part of it is that we're not afraid to call each other on our own bullshit.
Yeah.
Right. Like and even self stuff.
Yeah.
I think that sometimes we call ourselves out more than we even do each other.
Yeah.
Because we're constantly trying to evaluate our actions and what we did through this like process of extreme ownership. Yeah. Right. We're both like looking at every situation. Hey, how did I fuck that up?
Yeah. How can I
what
do it
could
better?
I have done better?
Yeah. How can I do it better next time?
And so there's a lot of conversations that we start with each other where it's just one of us coming back to the table like, hey, listen, I know that what I just said was messed up. Let me reframe that. Or this is what I was really thinking, and I'm sorry I overreacted. But we do that a lot with each other. Emily's raising her hand if you're watching on YouTube, but it's equal. I wouldn't say that it's just you. I do that a lot, and we do it with our kids too, right? Because when you mess up, you should own it.
Yeah.
And so, listen, if you're not happy and like there's some disagreement going on, the first thing you need to do is look at yourself and figure out where your deficiencies are and how you're contributing to what's wrong. Because the only thing you can fix is what you can control.
Yeah.
Right. And so if you can control it, go fix it. You can't control what your spouse is doing, but you can influence it.
Yeah.
Right. But you need to fix what you can control first.
So, and I think there's something to be said about like accepting somebody for who they are.
Yeah.
And not tearing them down for their weaknesses and loving them all encompassing. Like, I'm going to love you through it.
In spite of.
Yeah. And it's not going to be the thing that breaks us. I can love you enough to respect you to help you grow through this. And I'm going to grow and see how I can become stronger to help the situation move forward. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's something that's been kind of life altering and marriage altering for us, is that we've decided to grow together. Yeah. That it's not one of us moving the needle while the other one stands still or goes backwards. That we've decided like, hey, we're going to take this journey together, and we're going to figure out what we need to do to move the needle together forward. So, and it's opened up the door to have conversations constantly. So, but something that we came across in all of this data that was kind of eye-opening is being close friends with a divorcee, somebody who's already been divorced, increases your likelihood of being divorced by 147%. That's a lot.
It's a lot.
147%. Mm-hmm. So statistically, like what that's saying is if you're hanging out with all of your girlfriends and they're all divorced, and you go out and you've had a rough night with your spouse, and
it just turns into a bitch session.
It does.
Right.
And everyone's like, well, just get divorced. It's just easy. You don't have to deal with that. You won't ever have to deal with that again. And it becomes, again, planting the seed. It just becomes a part of the conversation. And it's almost like just putting like super fertilizer on it. Like, here, let me help you sprout that.
Just keep watering it, you know?
So it's really, and we've talked about this kind of in our non-negotiables. It's really important who you hang out with and who you seek wisdom from. Be very conscious. Be very conscious who you spend your time with and who you allow to sow seeds into your heart and into your relationships. Because who you are with, the people that influence you, what did we say? Is it 3 people?
You're the byproduct of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
And so if 3 of those 5 people are divorced, you need to be very conscious of how that influences your relationship. So it's and the data's there. Like this is not us.
It's not opinion.
These are facts.
Statistical fact.
So it was really interesting to kind of put it into perspective, because it's funny because I know a lot of these groups personally. I know a lot of women who hang out with other divorced women. And then
you get in these moms groups and all that
yeah,
stuff. And
yeah, the Facebook moms groups. And the comments are like, oh no, here's my attorney.
Yeah.
Like, can we step back? Because maybe there's something we can do before that. So, but kind of the heartbreaking part of all of that data, I mean, none of that's good. But for us, our children are one of the driving forces for a lot of the things that we're doing. And so when we got down to the end of that website and we were looking at how divorce affects your kids, that was where it kind of...
Yeah. And so I think like one of our action steps, I think we're just to back up a little bit is that we don't fight in front of our kids. Like we have disagreements, right? It's not fluffy rainbows and like sex all day long every day. I wish it was, but it's not.
It's not.
There are disagreements in our marriage, but those disagreements typically take place for the most part behind closed doors when we're not in front of the kiddos.
Yeah, and usually after bedtime, so it's an extra layer of protection.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're already asleep, and we're going to hash out whatever.
It's not like ears pressed against the door in the middle of the afternoon, you know. And look, I think part of that is because we don't really have a lot of big knockdown dragouts. We've had a few, but I think for the most part, our disagreements are like, where are we going for dinner?
Yeah,
you know,
we fight about the disagreement,
the stupid disagreements. So there's just not a lot of big knockdown dragouts disagreements to have. I think there are things that we revisit during the evening hour when we're talking. You know, sometimes like we're not happy with how each other disciplined one of the kids or something like that.
Yeah.
Like, and we'll have that conversation later on.
Yeah.
We'll pull back. And sometimes we'll overtake a conversation in the moment. Like if I'm losing my temper, sometimes Emily will step in and say, hey, you know, Daddy, why don't you let me get this one? And we'll take over, and we hold each other accountable for that, but we don't do it in a way that belittles
it's
each
not
other
condescending
in front of the kids.
Right. It's not condescending.
Yeah.
It's like, let me help in this.
It's in support.
Yeah. Let me support you in this, and we'll move forward.
So, and look, in the moment we're pissed at each other because like, I know that you're upset at me and you know that I'm upset at you or one or the other, but we always revisit the conversation later. Like, hey.
And I feel like that's gotten better.
Oh yeah.
Over the years.
As you develop a style and you meld and you figure that out, you really come together more congruently. It happens much less often now than it did early on.
Yeah. 5, 6 years ago, 10 years ago. Has that been? Yeah. Yeah. It's been a long time. I felt like it happened a lot more when we first adopted our big kids, because we were still learning,
still figuring out your parenting style.
We didn't know like what to do. And we had teenagers. It happens, I feel like, a lot less now. And when it does, because we have like that underlying, we've talked about it so much that we really have like body language and like cues that we just recognize.
Well, and part of it too is understanding that we're not going to have that conversation in front of the kids.
Yeah.
Like we have that understanding with each other. And so we know, and we have an agreement that we're not going to get into it. Right. Yeah. Because if you and your spouse don't talk about this, if you just decide, I don't want to fight in front of the kids, and you don't tell your spouse that you decided, they're going to understand why you're trying to be so non-confrontational when they want to go at it.
Yeah.
So you've got to have that conversation in the first place, but we have this understanding that it's not something that we're going to do. And I think part of that for me was that I watched my mom and her relationships have these huge just knockdown dragouts.
Yeah.
And I don't know, did you have that in your house?
So a lot of times they went to their room. It was thin walls, and it was in the middle of the day, and we homeschooled, so we were home. So even when it was behind closed doors, it was still, you could hear everything. And then as they got divorced, and later on, it became just anytime, anywhere. And it became a weapon. Like, I'm going to fight so that everyone can see and feel bad. So it was hard to watch it. And it was painful. Like you didn't want to be there. You didn't want to watch it. You didn't want to be a part of it. And as a child, you want to protect both of your parents. Like, you don't ever want to see them fighting and unhappy and unsafe. So it was hard.
Yeah, I think like it almost makes you question too sometimes as a kid, like, are they fighting because of me?
Yeah.
And sometimes they are, right? And sometimes you've got to eat that and know that like you're the reason that nobody's happy in the house. And so I don't ever want our kids to feel like mom and dad are fighting because they messed up, or that they're the reason that mom and dad are, you know what I mean? So I think because of that, we're super purposeful not to put our disagreement and the emotion of that onto our children. It's just it's not their responsibility to have.
Absolutely. So like statistically, happily married parents decrease their child's likelihood of getting divorced by 14%. So if you're a child that lives in a home that you don't see a lot of fighting, that your parents enjoy each other's company, that child is actually 14% less likely to get divorced just by simply growing up in that environment.
Yeah, it means you've probably set a better example for them to have a successful marriage. Like, look, they're watching, guys. Whatever you do, your children are going to emulate in their own life as an adult. Yeah. We are byproducts of the people who raised us. No matter how much you want to admit it, you are your mother's and your father's child or daughter. Like, you're their kid.
Yeah.
And like, I find myself catching these traits all the time where I'm like, fuck, that's my mom. Or, like, oh, that's my stepdad. Like, I feel I do this because, and you can link these character traits in your own life back to things that your parents did or that was ingrained in them. And it's just this personality thing that just got passed on to you. And so whatever example you're setting for them is the example they're going to live out in their own marriage. Yeah. And if you set the example that it's okay to run around and yell and scream and fight about everything and call your spouse every name in the book in front of your children and in front of God and everybody, they're going to do the same thing to their spouse. Yeah. Or they're going to think it's okay for their spouse to do it to them. One or the other.
And neither is what you want.
Yeah, neither's okay. Like, I don't want my daughters to think that your broke ass son is allowed to talk to her that way. I don't want that. I'll kill that boy. Like, I don't play that game. Like, you're going to respect my daughters.
And vice versa. Our daughters are going to respect their husbands.
And so this is a team thing. And whatever example you set for them is the example they live. And so when you have this, like, I bet that if your parents are divorced, that you can probably look back and find a trend of divorce among your family tree. Right?
Well, and not necessarily, maybe not divorce, only because divorce was really uncommon early 1900s, but a lot of unhealthy relationships.
I mean, I would say unhealthy relationships, but I would guess that you'd still find a trend of divorce. I mean, for me, my grandparents on my one side of my family, my one grandmother was remarried 3 or 4 times. My other grandmother was remarried twice, 3 times. I'm sorry. And then a bunch of really unhealthy relationships in the interim. Yeah. And I don't have any history beyond that. Actually, I think on my mom's side that my grandparents were single marriage, like one married couple. Yeah. But like you set this precedent, you really do. And it becomes a generational thing when you just make it okay. And I don't want that to live on in our legacy anymore. I want strong marriages and healthy relationships and meaningful, loving relationships to be a legacy that we leave for our children. And I'm teaching my sons how to love women, and I'm teaching my daughters how to be loved, and vice versa for Emily.
Yeah, I'm in a home that's built on mutual respect and recognizing who the head is. And I know that that's kind of a touchy subject in this day and age, but like there really is something to that as the wife and as the woman in the home. Like there are certain things that I add value to, but I also know that as the wife that I respect you as the head of our household, and I know that there are things that I can add value to you as much as you can add value to me.
And I want to be really clear on that, because I think that there are some men who hear a woman say that and think, oh, I'm going to tell her what to do. And that's not what that means.
Yeah, no.
Wives, that's not what that means. Your husband doesn't get to dictate to you how to live a life. That's not how the head works. I have never, ever made a decision that was impactful without consoling Emily.
Ever.
Like, we talk about every decision we make. And at the end of the day, she trusts my gut, but her input is super, super valuable. And it usually steers the decision. And at the end of the day, I know that it's my decision to make, but it's not a decision I make alone. Right? It's still a team decision.
Right.
I married you because I feel like you add value to my life. I married you because I feel like together we can do more than I can do alone. So why would I not include you in everything that we do? Because you add value to it. And so, like, if you're in a marriage and you're not consoling your spouse in those decisions, ask yourself that question. Like, do you feel like you married them because they add value to your life? And if you think they add value to your life, why would you not make decisions together?
Include them, yeah.
So, like, this is not this the biblical foundation in that. And I think that really historically, like, people who are super traditional in their biblical or religious viewpoints use this as an excuse to be assholes in their marriage.
Yeah.
They do.
Yeah, you're right.
I mean, you even hear, like, there are some old school pastors that are just demeaning to their wives because of this scripture. They set horrible examples for the flocks that they lead because they've just got this skewed viewpoint. And it's not permission to do whatever you want and let your woman just be your accessory, because that is how some people feel about that scripture. She's not your accessory. She's your companion. And you should be doing those things together. And what the scripture means is that she should trust you enough to lead her, not rule her. Those are not the same thing.
And it's really cool because we get to live that out and live that out for our kids. And it's really beautiful for someone who's come from the background that we've come from to be able to walk that out. That I do trust you implicitly to lead, not me alone, but our family. And that you've done that in such an elegant and beautiful way with love and patience and grace. You've done a really good job for someone who didn't have a lot of examples.
You fall short sometimes, right?
You do.
But I think that the important thing is that you continue to press forward and continue to improve and pick yourself up and figure out where we each fucked up. Like, because the alternative is a body bag, right? Like we have this joke, like, look, the only way out of this thing is in a body bag or a hearse. Jesus is taking you, or I'm going to do it myself. So, and we joke with each other. Like, she jokes like, oh, I got to learn how to drive the tractor so I can bury you.
There was no prenup.
So we're in this, right? This is it. And you've got to make that the decision. It's a non-negotiable. You don't get to decide. I married you and I committed to you forever. And that's it. How do we make it work?
Yeah.
Right? Because making it work is what marriage is.
Yeah.
It's not like, oh, we decide that we're going to sleep together forever and I'll let you know when I want that to happen.
Yeah.
That's not marriage. And some people think that that's what marriage is. It's a constant compromise, and a constant way to continue figuring out how to add value to one another. How do I add value?
And sometimes, this sounds silly, but sometimes when you just go through the motions in the beginning, let's say you've gotten to a place that's unhealthy. You've forgotten how to talk to your spouse. Start somewhere, start talking, start doing something, and it becomes healthy pretty quickly, because it really does just take a little bit of action. And going back to some of the stats, we were looking, even if you're not divorced, if you live in a home where your parents fight a lot and you hear it and you see it, that child is more likely to get divorced. So it's not even if you got divorced. If you live in a house that's unhealthy.
Well, because you've set an example of an unhealthy marriage. So why the hell would your kids want to go out and be in an unhealthy relationship like they saw their parents in?
And so it sets this precedent. So when you start to have the conversations and you start to just be kind for the sake of being kind to your spouse. Yes, they probably left the toilet seat up. Maybe they didn't make the bed. They didn't put the throw pillow back on the couch after they knocked it off because they were watching the football game. All of those stupid...
Making me feel personally attacked.
You and the 2-year-old and the 5-year-old, and I pick up the throw pillows like way too much, like 17 times a day.
I was kicking the throw pillow at the toddler the other day. That was so much fun. She was having a blast too.
She was laughing. It's like so funny.
But I could feel Emily crawling. Like every time I lunged the throw pillow across the living room, she's like, "Stop throwing my fucking throw pillows." I love it.
But it's the little things. When I do something kind for you, just for the sake of being kind to you, our children see it. And it's really cool to watch them understand that this is how I grow and I help other people. And I get to learn about this other person and what makes them tick. And when I know them, I know how to bless them. And so personal story, we were Christmas shopping for Daddy today. And so we got to play that out in real life because they've watched how I've watched you and how I bless you and the things that you enjoy because we do them together. And so watching our daughters at 7, 5, and 2 talk it out in a store like, oh no, Daddy likes this. Or we were, don't get distracted. We're not shopping for us. We're shopping for Dad. And so hearing the 5 and the 7-year-old kind of banter back and forth, like, think about Daddy. What is Daddy like? And so they were talking about the things that you already have and the things that you already collect. And so how do we find those things? And it's because in our growth and as we bless each other and as we love on each other, those are the things that we pick up on, right? Like, oh, I know that you like this thing because I keep buying you that thing. And so our kids pick up on that too because they watch us. And it was just a really sweet, tender moment to watch them without any input from me.
Simply because you've set the example of how to love. Yeah. Right?
And it's simple.
And they mimic it.
And it's, it's not huge, but man, it made an impact. And it for someone so small and so young to kind of pick up on those things, how much more so would they pick up on the big, huge fights and the knockdown drag-outs and the constant fighting if that was what they were exposed to? You don't that's the difference. That's the legacy. What kind of legacy are you really leaving?
They're only going to love as good as you love. And however you love, they're going to think it's okay to be loved the same way. So that alone should make you want to make whatever changes necessary in your marriage. That your kids are going to let someone love them the way that you love your husband or your wife. And so you should ask yourself if you're loving well. Because however you're loving is how your little girl is going to let a man love her. And however you treat your husband is how your son is going to let a woman treat him. That's the example. And they're going to love just like you love. And so if you want them to treat their spouse with dignity and respect and love, you better be leading with that example. Because they're going to love the same way you love. Unless they have some coming to Jesus moment and they decide to go figure out how to do it. But the statistics on that aren't very good. Set the good example.
I mean, push the odds in their favor.
Yeah. Right? Give them all the tools.
Give them every chance they can get.
So I'm going to leave you guys with these stats, and we're going to close and get off of here tonight. But I want you to think about this, that there are 21.9 million kids in the United States living in homes that are separated, one-parent households or divided households. And of those 21.9 million kids, 30% live in poverty. And so you get to decide, do your kids get to be in that statistical viewpoint. Don't make them a stat. So don't forget that Jesus fucking loves you.
Fuck your excuses.
You got to live life. You got to do it right, and you got to give the good example, guys. They're watching.
Leave a legacy worth fighting for.
See you next week.
Night.